The world can seem upside down at times, which has set me on a journey in search for love, truth, and ultimately personal freedom. I'm on a mission to help people find peace and healing so that each of us as individuals and ultimately the collective can be free from whatever keeps us stuck and skews our view of just how beautiful this life can be. Welcome to the Lucas Mack Show. Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome back to another episode of the Lucas Mack Show. I am Lucas Mack. Really excited to bring you this episode. I had an amazing conversation with author John O'Connor. He's the author of a new book called A Strange Short Trip. And it's documenting and centrally figures on Terence McKenna, one of the pioneers in psychedelics and profound thinker and orator, and then his brother, Dennis McKenna. It's a really cool, fascinating book. John's an amazing writer. We get into even how he got into this book. He's a really interesting journalist and how he puts his spin on it and goes and he traces the steps of what Terence and Dennis McKenna did back in 1971. So very interesting story. The book's fantastic. I highly recommend reading it. And this conversation with John is really good. So hope you enjoy. Well, brothers and sisters, like I said, I read a lot and jumped into John's book and absolutely loved how he wrote. I even told my wife I'm really excited to have this conversation. John O'Connor, thanks for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So much I want to chat with you about. But before we even get into it, what was your path to even get into journalism, start writing?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, the short answer is that I, I always wanted to write. I knew I knew I didn't want to have a desk job. I mean, I do have a desk job. It's just at home, but I knew I didn't want to do what my dad did, which is I go to an office 9 to 5 every day and even on the weekends. And so but I always loved to read and to write. And I took like a sort of after college, I took a few years off, like or more than a few years, and kind of bounced around a few places in a few different countries, and decided I was like mid-20s. Decided I had to do something. I had to figure something out. I was like bartending basically, and so I applied to journalism school, or actually I did apply to journalism school. Didn't get in, but I applied to a creative nonfiction writing school,
Cool.
graduate school. Got into that, um, and that was that. And so yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think back in the day I imagined that I would be sitting at home writing the great American novel, one
Yeah.
after another or something. Like I didn't necessarily think I would be getting into journalism in the way that I am now. It took me a while to find that, but I think I knew for a long time that I wanted to write and wanted to be doing this in some capacity.
Hmm. So what, I guess, were you around? Did you grow up in a house of writers or where did you get that bug early on?
I don't know. No, I did not. My house was like virtually bookless. I mean, my parents had my mom read Dick Francis book, the old the novelist who I don't know if you're familiar with him, but and I remember we had like the collected works of Faulkner
Hmm.
for some reason, but that was like about it. And, but but I loved reading. Became a big reader in high school and through college, and really and knew I guess I don't know. I just fell in love with some particular writers early on, and just the fancy struck me that like that was like what I wanted to do. I wanted to be like them, and I certainly the romance of it kind of spoke to me, and that maybe not that in that I hadn't yet grappled with what writing actually is day to day, which can be very um very drudgery like, and it's but yeah, I think the romance kind of spoke to me of it, and being a writer, and But but yeah, I just wanted to mostly, I think, to not be pumping gas. Not that
Yeah.
there's anything wrong with pumping gas.
Sure.
In
Sure.
many ways, it's a better living than being a writer. But I just wanted to find kind of my voice in this medium, I guess.
Hmm. Well, writing, I was a journalist, but I went down the broadcast journalism route. So I was a TV reporter for
Mm.
many years in different markets. And I have so much respect for print journalists and writers, that I think the broadcast journalism is a little bit of the cheat code in writing. But I really appreciate great writing. And, um, we're talking about your book, A Short, Strange Trip. And I just got through the prologue, but I just enjoy your cadence and your tone and your almost like I don't know. There's a bit of perspective. I think that you carry a bit of skepticism and also curiosity. That's a really beautiful blend that I've catching so far. But beyond that, how did you even get into writing this book? Were you, because I know reading in the book, you weren't going down the psychedelic path.
Yeah, no, I mean, I did as a kid, I mean, I started at my time with psychedelics way too early. It's, ironically that just the time you start to get a little bit of freedom and you start experimenting with drugs and alcohol is probably the worst time for you to do that. And
Right.
but I did it, in my 15, 16, 17, really did get into that stuff. And but then gave it up for a long time. I think that probably happens with a lot of people where you do it too much early on and then just kind of tap out and then but I had sort of a second wind with psychedelics with this book in particular. And really, I just discovered Terence McKenna. I mean, there are a couple of different origin stories here, but and the main one is that I discovered Terence, the subject of my book, and his magnificent book called True Hallucinations.
Mm.
I had not heard of him or it, which I was surprised. It shocked me because I kind of pride myself on knowing about like obscure psychedelic weirdos from the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
knew all that stuff and heard all of it. And here was this guy writing about this spectacular, like almost death-defying trip that he took to the Colombian Amazon in the early 1970s with his brother and some friends in search of these indigenous hallucinogens.
Mm.
And I thought, what the heck? What is this? And when I found out where they were, like they're in this small village in the Putumayo region of the Amazon called La Chorrera, which I had heard about that for complicated reasons. But I that totally floored me. I was like, whoa. And I think I thought, judging by the books, I know you're not supposed to do this, but judging by the cover, I thought I could tell what the book was, um, and it totally defied my expectations. I mean, I think I thought it was some weird hippy dippy thing that, didn't have much relevancy to me or to our present moment, but it really does and did.
Yeah.
And then the other, this is more answer than you wanted, but the other part of the story is right around that time, my father, who has struggled with alcohol for most of his adult life, was largely at my behest, starting to consider. He'd been in and out of rehab, various treatment programs and stuff, and none of it really ever stuck. And so he'd started considering psychedelic therapy, which was just really starting to come online then.
Yeah.
And he did try two different kinds of psychedelic assisted therapy for alcohol addiction. And so those two things like really kind of intertwined in a kind of strange way and got me thinking about this book.
Yeah. Um, did it help your dad?
It did not. No. It So he tried ketamine therapy, which is legal in Michigan where he lives at licensed facilities.
Hmm.
Did not have any effect, and he did a few months later did psilocybin therapy with a kind of quote unquote licensed guide,
Yeah.
and it did not help at all. If anything, it probably hurt. Uh,
Hmm.
so, but as I say in the book, it was kind of a last ditch effort, after 50 plus years of, kind of again, it's kind of scraping rock bottom various ways, and much of it very functional. He had a successful career, and it's so it's not as dire as I may be making it out, but it didn't work any better than any other kind of intervention that he had tried over the years.
Growing up, having an alcoholic father, did that, in hindsight now, kind of shape even the subjects that you're aware of or interested in? I mean, probably a nervous system for a little boy. I mean, I grew up in a really traumatic, not that I'm saying that you did, but just the cadence of just not having
Yeah.
that consistent calmness and not knowing where the highs and low are. Did that shape how you were even interested in the subject in the first place?
I don't know. That's a really insightful question that I've never thought of before. But I think I would say that in my writing, I try to be attuned to people's vulnerabilities.
Hmm.
People are human. People are flawed. And that doesn't make them any less important or interesting than anyone else. I mean, people can be arch and manipulative too. Like you got to be careful, but I think you gotta try. I think in my writing, I try to see people as this is going to sound a little precious, and maybe it is, but just as that, as like sort of flawed human beings who are really struggling with something, with belief or disbelief, or struggling with some kind of attempt at wider understanding that is and equanimity that is kind of eluding them. And so I guess in that sense, I am drawn to drawn to those stories. And I guess if you put me on the spot, I would say my father is, arguably a shadow figure for me in a lot of my work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Um, Obviously, I have not read the whole book. Okay, so I mean,
Yeah, yeah, it's okay.
leading
That's
into
all right.
this, but
Yeah.
I will finish it. And looking forward to it. But how did your view on the psychedelic movement shift or evolve through the journey of telling this story of Terrence?
Um, yeah, I didn't really, the funny thing is I didn't really know anything about it. I mean, I had read Michael Pollan's book, and I was really intrigued by that. I mean, he's such a brilliant writer and like a well-intentioned guy, and he sort of brought all this stuff that had been going on for you, as I'm sure you know, and probably your listeners are familiar with, just brought all this stuff out in the open that had been going on kind of behind closed doors for years, either in the underground or in the kind of research facilities at Johns Hopkins and NYU and so on. And I was like, I was kind of shocked by how much of it was going on and for how long. I just, I think like many people, I'm surprised at how far we've come in such a short amount of time. We had to live through the kind of dark ages of the war on drugs, which we
Right.
seem to be just emerging from. And I never thought. I was just talking to a friend of mine about this the other day, who we grew up together in Kalamazoo, a very small town in Michigan. That's not that small, but pretty small. And we were trying to think back then when we were like, 16, 17 years old, could we imagine a time like now when you could just walk around the corner and buy legal
Right.
marijuana? And seemingly we're not very far off from something approaching a parallel experience with psychedelics, like it's just so no, I did not, even when I began this book, I did not foresee that. Even though, Pollen is sort of pointing the way, like
Hmm.
I just in the last couple of years there have been tremendous kind of leaps and bounds
Yeah.
with respect to that. And I also, I didn't have any inkling when I make a few claims in my book about Terence's the connection between Terence and our current psychedelic renaissance. Some of his kind of really important ideas that he bequeathed us, I say, and that all kind of occurred to me as I was working. So I didn't. It's not something that I thought about going into it. It was a kind of happy um, realization. But so that was a shock also.
So I guess just for us to level set for everyone listening, who is Terrence McKenna?
Okay. No, that's good. Yeah, that's exactly what my mother-in-law said when she read it. She was like, "Who's Terrence?"
I love
And
it.
And I was like, it's a good question because a lot of people don't know who he is, and he really
Yeah.
deserves, I think, to be better known. But Terence McKenna was a psychedelic guru, I guess, for lack of a better word, of the 60s and 70s. He was sort of like he was friends with and similar in many ways to someone like Timothy Leary. He knew like Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. He knew those guys, Allen Ginsberg.
Mhm.
Unlike them, Terence really developed a kind of epistemology, like a theory of mind about psychedelics, who should be using them, to what ends, where they came from, um, and what they meant.
Mm.
Um, and when he gave us, by us, I mean the kind of psychedelic underground, although I'm not sure it's sort of works to really put it that way anymore. But he um, gave the sort of psychedelic movement some very important things. Number one is he gave us magic mushrooms. And there's a big caveat here, and I should it really I actually think it was his brother Dennis. Dennis gets very heated when you talk about this because it was Terence who claimed to discover how to cultivate magic mushrooms at home. And point of fact, I think it was Dennis. Terence was just the better articulate. He was a better known figure,
Yeah.
charismatic, and um, he was the writer. And so he kind of took credit, was given credit, and took credit for this. But either way, Terence and or Dennis were, if not the very first, among the first to figure out how to cultivate magic mushrooms at home
Mm.
in the early 1970s. And it's kind of weird to think about because in their present ubiquity, but back in the day, it was like psychedelic mushrooms were a relative, like a not novelty item,
Yeah.
even in the underground. Like you could get LSD, you could get synthetic DMT, you could get ecstasy, but mushrooms, you basically had to go to Oaxaca to get them. That's where Timothy Leary had his first encounter with magic mushrooms, was in Mexico.
Mm.
So Terrence and Dennis figured out how to grow magic mushrooms at home and began selling them and giving them away in very large quantities. So they sparked this kind of seismic shift in the psychedelic underground. And so that's who Terrence is, partly what he'll be remembered for is
Yeah.
is that. He
Was
was a
he?
sort of an enigmatic figure, a complicated guy with some really, some kind of good ideas and some totally batshit ideas that make no sense. And unfortunately, it was the batshit ideas that he tends to be remembered for
Mm.
mostly. But
Yeah. Yeah. Wasn't he a professor at Berkeley
he
for?
was not a professor. No, he went to school there. He
Went to school there.
yeah,
Okay.
he went to undergrad. He was from a little town in Colorado called Paonia, um, kind of near, like, over the mountains from Crested Butte,
Okay.
but a tiny little farming, kind of orchards, cattle ranching town. And he left when he was 16 and moved to Berkeley. Sorry, moved to California, finished high school, went to Berkeley, dropped out, went on the road, and then a few years later went back and finished his degree. But no, he never, as far as I can tell, Terrence really never even had a job.
Mm.
I mean, he cut flowers once at a flower shop outside of Boulder, but he never really had a 9 to 5 job. He made his living writing and proselytizing and giving talks and lectures and yeah, so
It's
he
amazing.
is a Berkeley, very Berkeley-like figure. He was there in the late 60s and considered himself a political radical, and
Right.
was there during the Summer of Love and all that. So yeah, yeah.
Very fascinating guy, and to hear Dennis, I think I've heard two different episodes where Dennis has been on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, and really fantastic conversations. Dennis is a brilliant mind,
Yeah.
and definitely the academic side, and trying to, I think, almost it feels like, I mean, he's brilliant in his own right, but he's almost, in my perspective, trying to counterbalance the tipping of the scale of viewing Terrence and the whole psychedelic movement in just untethered reality. And he's bringing that groundedness to, I think, the whole conversation.
Yeah, he's a little more level-headed. He always
Yeah.
was. Of the two brothers, the more level-headed, kind of sane, sober one, who was more grounded, more connected to reality. And
Right.
he and Terrence had this profound experience in Colombia and La Chorrera in 1971, and in which I write about. Dennis nearly went insane from all the drugs that they were taking, and really did go kind of in a inner space journey for a couple of weeks.
Mm.
Um, Ironically, he did come down eventually, um, and uh, and had a very productive life. Got a PhD in ethnobotany and was a very successful guy. And Terrence, in a lot of ways, never came down from the experience. I mean, he really latched on to that quote unquote experiment at La Chorrera as um, the sort of defining feature of his life. And virtually all of the next 30 years he spent trying to understand and articulate what it was that happened to them there.
Mm.
But yeah, Dennis is a great, an articulate kind of ambassador for that time, and for now too.
I have so many questions. I first of all, I love this, and thanks for coming on. If I haven't thanked you, I don't know if I
Oh,
did at the beginning. Um,
it's my pleasure.
the the whole movement of just there's a movement right now. It's like shelf psychedelics. There's a movement right now that is resurging of this return to the earth in a way that isn't owned, I think, by a defined, the hippies or there's it's not a defined group. There's a big movement, homesteaders. I think with Robert F. Kennedy and Maha, people are. I make a joke that owning chickens is the gateway drug to buying land, and
Mhm.
it's like people who want their own eggs. They're really, I think, I attribute it to consciousness actually rising. But there's always you said shadow. Your father is a shadow. I definitely understand that. There's a shadow side to everything. And so I look at what the earth provides and I call it plant medicine. And then I
Mhm.
look at the synthetic side of it, and it's not like the CIA was dosing people with mushrooms. I'm sure they've done those experiments, but they're dosing people with synthetics. And I feel like there's always the imitation to the real thing. And one of the things I've always been struck by with listening to Dennis and listening to lots of recordings of Terrence, and he has a unique voice. So
Yep.
it's like
Yeah.
listening to that voice. I can hear his voice right now as we're talking.
Yeah.
It was almost like they were trying to merge the organic, um, like mysticism, organic nature, and our relationship and how we bridge those both. Do you think that's an accurate observation or
Yeah, I don't know about Dennis, but certainly for Terrence was
parents? Yeah.
very much I mean, you probably are right about Dennis. I hadn't thought about that before, but he was very much a part of that kind of back to the land kind of hippie movement of returning to an exalted time in the past. He was very nostalgic for a time that probably never really existed. It's certainly not the way that he imagined it, but very nostalgic for a time when before all the sort of craziness that he was witnessing, the end of the Vietnam War and the civil rights protests and the anti-war movement and stuff. And he I think was like many people of that era was very became very smitten with that back to the land
Hmm.
idea and reconnecting with something more kind of primal and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I get it, and like I think we're all kind of nostalgic in a lot of ways for something. Like I'm incredibly nostalgic for New York City in the 1990s. Before cell phones. I mean, yeah, before cell phones, before the internet, at least in the way that we have the internet now. Like and before, just you know, below 14th Street became like a province of the rich European tourists. But my ideas about it, my memories of it start to wash out at the edges once I kind of investigate it. And I think nostalgia has that capacity to just kind of crumble in our hands a little bit.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is kind of responding to your question at all, but once you kind of investigate some of Terrence's nostalgia, it does start to kind of do the same, is just
Hmm.
crumble apart a little bit. Now that wasn't nobly intended, it didn't have there was weren't things that to learn from it or to take away, but um, the particular kind of time and place that he imagined us returning to, I think never existed.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you do you think, based on the research and the writing and your own experiences, do you think that humanity has always tried to fill a spiritual calling, whatever that may be, and Terrence's answer for that spiritual calling was plant medicine, or do you think that he was? I guess my question is, based on your research in the book, is it unique to Terrence? I know he went, he was, I mean, he coined the term heroic dose. Like he was such a
Yeah.
pioneer in even understanding uh, psychedelics. But do you think it's unique to him, or from your own experiences, do you think that this is something that humanity actually goes through, and some people will find an answer in this, and some people will find it in religion, but it's something innate in the human?
Yeah, well, I don't know how that might be a little above my pay grade, but I don't think Terrence was unique in it at all. Like, I mean, I think I really try to place him on this kind of spectrum of religious mystics. I mean, he really was. He
Yeah.
would have hated me putting it that way, but he really was. Like, I mean, and he thought magic mushrooms were touched by the divine, you know.
Mm,
And he got that idea from indigenous Americans,
mm,
and particularly the Mazatec Indians of Oaxaca. Like, I mean, they have been using, um, it's a little kind of slippery, but at least using magic mushrooms in their religious ceremonies for at least, several generations, if not many hundreds of years. So, and Terence took that idea that that mushrooms were a religious sacrament, and he thought that we should be taking them that way, that they weren't just for
yeah.
fun, and they
Recreation.
weren't
That's
they
right.
weren't yeah they weren't just to trip your balls off and like have a great time, but that they were to be used intentionally to those ends as a religious for religious means.
Mm,
And yeah, he was a seeker. I think we all are in
mm,
some ways,
yeah.
maybe not as explicitly as he was, but he was definitely the sort of a big daddy kind of, seeker for like elemental truths and the elusive truths of what it means to be alive and on this planet. He spent 30 years trying to answer some of the sort of kind of toughest questions and most elusive questions that there are. And again, he would have hated me putting it in religious terms, but if you look at his writing and look the way he talked, like it's almost identical to the sort of Catholic
Yeah.
conversion idiom. Like, I
Mm,
mean, it's just exactly that, and in so many ways. And that's not a judgment. I don't mean that in a pejorative way at all. That's totally
sure.
fine. But I definitely see him as a religious seeker.
Well, someday, I don't know if it will ever come out, but my thesis is that any mystic, regardless of what modality that they have put themselves in or under, have all experienced psychedelic mushrooms at some point. And I think even
Oh
the
yeah,
Christian mystics, and I think the monks, and
yeah.
many, um, and that's one of the things. I've been on this journey. I grew up in an incredibly religious home, and I've explored every. I mean, became a voracious reader at the age of 20, and every path, every spiritual. I've been with the wackiest, what people would call like just wacky stuff, and like orthodoxy and religions, and did all the actually monotheistic religions studied. And I don't know, it's fascinating, this whole human psychology of our journey through a short time in this earth. And then, we try to like figure out some meaning, some purpose. And I'm struck by um, a few things, and Terrence, I think, can become, because I'm just bringing this up because you referenced the religious mystic, that people, one thing that I like about Terrence is he dispels what I think is harmful to humanity, is this hierarchy thing that we just default. I think we're born as children into a home. There's a parent, there's a child, there's an automatic hierarchy, and then religions can co-opt this hierarchy to make people feel less than and keep them in a system. But the minute you give someone a psychedelic, it breaks, I think, that rote mode of I am only this, and therefore you are greater than me, the priest, the rabbi, the imam, the guru.
Yeah, yeah.
And um, I I've been on this journey to dispel our insecurity as individuals and our insecurity as humans and stop putting people on pedestals. Moses is a good example. I really believe, I don't know if you've gone down like John Allegro's work and this whole theory of the burning bush with the story of Moses was Moses marries the the high priest of the Midianites, and those are the Druze, Druz, people today in Jordan and Israel, and their religion is based off the acacia tree burning, and that's the highest concentration of DMT. So I think the story of a burning bush, of course, and God speaks to him. It's no different than Terence writing his writings down
Mm.
and articulating it and getting enough following. It just happened to be some guy named Moses had a very similar profound experience, wrote it down, and enough people followed that narrative. Whether that's true or not, that's a theory that's been put out. But one of the things that understanding psychedelics in as a variable to the story, what I think is important for people to understand is Moses wasn't an angel embodied in human form. He was a human that had an experience that someone else can have and may have something very similar, may have something completely different, but they're not on greater planes than you or I. They were just humans that had an experience. And I don't know, that's been my, what I love how you even started is every human's flawed and we're just doing our best
Yeah.
to, go through this life and find as much pleasure and peace and joy and all those things. But these forms can usually keep us feeling less than, and then the people that have the answer feel greater than, but those people have an answer based on my history of, what I've said is they've enjoyed psychedelics at some point and it's broken out and they're able to speak, and that's why it's so alluring. So I'm going to stop talking.
Mm.
But that's my observation, and I'm really on a mission to see humanity heal and to not feel less than. So sharing all that,
Yeah.
does that resonate in just how you have seen and wrote? I don't know, just your experiences. How does that resonate with you?
Well, let me say first is that Terrence was totally on the same page, and he'd be right there with you. In fact, his book Food of the Gods, if you get a chance to read, is one of the things he claims in that book is that it was psychedelics that gave rise in many instances to what we have come to think of as religion. They were one of the catalysts. And in fact, there's like some pretty good work now, research being done to try to establish that the early Christian sacrament
Yes.
contained psychedelic ergot,
Yeah.
which is kind of like a derivative of LSD. And there's no smoking gun there, but some pretty kind of tantalizing evidence. And to kind of the broader point, like I'm not I'm not sure. I mean, Terrence would again, I think, be with you in the sort of the hierarchy of religious forms. Like he always said he didn't want to be the sort of guru. He was suspicious of the gurus charging admission at the door. Although he, just to make a living, he actually did exactly that. But he loathed kind of traditional religion, the whole hierarchy of the church and
Yeah.
the Catholicism. He grew up in a very not a sort of a very strict Catholic family, but an observant Catholic family. Went to church twice a week
Yeah.
and was expected to, and he hated it. And so he thought of psychedelics as something totally different that offered you everybody a personal contact with the divine.
Yeah.
So that was it was a way to kind of subvert the yeah the kind of the tier-like system that we see in many kind of traditional religions. That he thought psychedelics were helped you get past all that. That you didn't need a priest and you didn't need the the edifice
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all. Yeah. So um yeah, I don't know if that answers your
Yeah,
question.
no, it does. I guess it's I guess there's, not, we live in a dualistic world, and maybe the dualism here is Terrence's view of connection to the divine without any intermediary system or person. And then on the other side of that is definitely an intermediary and definitely a hierarchy of subjection of oneself. And so I don't know, it's just fascinating how, as you wrote this book, how did your relationship change with yourself and how you view yourself, and how did your relationship change with how you viewed the world?
Um, I think I mean, one way it changes, and I do write about my father in the book, and there's a kind of long chapter where I deal with his psychedelic therapies. It seemed important to grapple with that, given some of the claims I'm making about Terrence's ideas and how they connect to the current moment, um, and that was pretty intense. I mean, I was with my father not when he did the ketamine, but when he did the psilocybin stuff, maybe as a preamble to that, I don't know how much of this how much I want to give away because I just don't want to spoil the book. But
Yeah.
like around this time, my son fell ill. He was 4 at the time, like really ill, in and out of hospital and stuff. And it's my youngest, and that was really the first time, um, I think that my wife and I, as parents, really experienced like true suffering in a sense
Yeah.
that the kind that just seemed to kind of it did come out of nowhere and um was pretty intense and but for which there was no help to be found anywhere, not in sort of traditional medicine. Try as they might, doctors and nurses who I love to death, and we have the one of the best, if not the best, children's hospital here in Boston that people come from around the world to get help for their kids. A lot of times that help just can't be found, And I think I was brought face to face for the first time, or at least as a parent for the first time, with like real suffering and how for so many people there you're just completely at loose ends, totally helpless. There's no help to be gotten from friends or family, from doctors or nurses, from materialist kind of nostrums at all, and not from religion, not from anything.
Right.
And so that really changed my mind about psychedelics, psychedelic therapy. I mean, it just seemed to me that to withhold psychedelics from people,
Mm.
um, and there are an awful lot of people who attest to the fact that they can be helpful, if not totally life-saving and life-sustaining. To withhold them from people in those circumstances, why? Because they have the potential for bad outcomes.
Right.
Like lots of medical interventions have the potential for bad outcome. It just struck me as so perverse, um, and
Mm.
um, uh, and I don't think I had really a very strong opinion about that until then.
Mm.
I think I thought going in, especially with my dad, I was like, oh, all the stuff, the Michael Pollan stuff, that book that I was like, Roland Griffiths, the late great scientist at Johns Hopkins, who deserves and got a lot of the credit for helping get us to our kind of current Renaissance. I thought, oh, this is just going to work, you know,
Mm.
and it didn't, and that surprised me too. So there were kind of um, two contrary experiences there that were both really surprising and did really kind of, I think, change me. Um, I mean, it's just a reminder, a sobering reminder, if you will, of how um, uh, like how what's the kind of brittle all of this stuff is, like how little we really still know about it, and
Yeah.
it can
Yeah.
be helpful for sure, certainly, but it also can be the opposite of helpful. And
Yeah.
people should have access to these drugs if they need them. They also should know what they're getting themselves into.
Right.
There seems to be, in this great rush to get these drugs, very little discussion about the sort of necessity of ongoing psychotherapy
Right.
before and after sessions, and a really more honest discussion about how these drugs can fit into a wider kind of framework of well-being for people and
Mm,
human flourishing, and we seem to be skipping a step, like
yeah, yeah.
you know.
It's a good way to say it. Skip. That's. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. That's a great way to
No,
say
no,
it. Though,
no, no.
skipping a
So
step.
yeah, I mean, it's funny because like, having grown up, and I grew up in I think I'm a little older than you, but I grew up in those old commercials with the guy with the frying pan. These are
Yeah,
your
yeah, yeah,
drugs.
yeah,
And so without any real serious discussion of what he meant by drugs, like are we including alcohol and cigarettes in that, and like
right.
but now it seems like we've um traded one set of prior convictions for another set of priors. Now it's the general sentiment seems to be that, well, all drugs are good, actually. They're just something that's been suppressed for a long time, and
Yeah,
the elites have been keeping them from us, and like now it's our time, and so I think yeah, I guess in a really long-winded answer to your question is just that I think need to have a more honest and kind of sober conversation about what these drugs, what their efficacies can be, and how they should be used,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and to what ends.
Have you tracked at all the work Brian Hubbard has been doing with ibogaine and
Yeah,
Governor Greg Perry, and then
yeah,
Trump just signed that a couple Saturdays
yeah,
ago,
yeah, a
and
couple of weeks ago. Yeah,
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 and Brian in his like is probably the best eloquent speaker and articulator and storyteller that I've heard in a long time, but um, he would, I think, align very closely to Terrence's, like, these bring you back to that right, proper relationship with the divine. Um, and it's also interesting is, the trauma in any way it comes, I help a lot of people with coach, help run retreats, help a lot of people heal trauma, and trauma comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and there isn't one trauma that is greater than or lesser than. And I think that's the trap we get in is like, well, I grew up in a severe situation, and someone might hear my story and then they think, well, I didn't grow up in that bad, so I should not be as bad as what you're dealing with. And then
yeah.
we get into this big thing. But I think this great leveling is what I'm talking about. Let me share this. I had a Navy SEAL friend, medically retired 10 years in the SEAL teams, and I went into a personal development, emotional intelligence training. He had invited me into that. He sounded like he was different, and I had a radical change in my life, a real born again experience, if there ever was one. First time I was surrounded by truly like unconditionally loving people that just wanted to hear my story and not judge me, not give me the answer, and it was incredibly cathartic, and it was an unbelievable experience. And that was after being in therapy for 2 years. But the next step was he invited me, the same Navy SEAL, into the psychedelic world for healing. And one of the things he told me, he said, if you think of everyone standing on a shoreline and there's a cliff right behind our backs, at the very top of that cliff is the person who caused the trauma in our lives. And for me, it was my dad. For you, it might be your dad. For someone else, they might have just not been hugged enough, or, who knows? But he said, but those people that create the trauma push the same size boulder into the ocean, and the waves hit us all the same.
Hmm.
And that struck me. And that was like a key for me to unlock that we're all on this journey. And I guess I'm only bringing this up is Brian Hubbard and what Trump's the one that legalized CBD, that even get CBD everywhere. And and he's obviously a polarizing figure, but also like this backdoor, almost like a cosmic game has to be played. Like it has to be so abrasive here, but all of a sudden on the back door, there's this other like healing mode. And I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is it's a fascinating time to be human and also answer questions that seem to be so existential, but also very personal. Like why I'm bringing this up is it might have been existential for you until I'm sorry that happened to you, your son's sick. And that becomes, goes from existential thought to all of a sudden real personal. And then that changed your view. And I think we're all going through this right now in some degree. And maybe this is, Terrence would be very happy if he was alive today to see where we are, and maybe he wouldn't. But
One of the great ironies with Terrence too is that he was not into therapy. He probably needed it. He probably really needed it, but and I describe this in my book. The strange twist at the heart of this book is that he did not think psychedelics should be used for therapeutic ends. He thought that they were um, pointedly to be used to hasten a kind of evolutionary leap. He had this long, kind of very long, complicated, and really interesting idea called the stoned ape theory, how our early hominids ancestors had found psilocybin mushrooms on the sort of arid plains of Africa, and how eating those psilocybin mushrooms had led to this great leap forward in cognitive and sexual development, and ultimately led to the creation of religion. And he thought that's what uh, they should be used for, based on very little evidence, really, to speak of. But he just had this great intuition for it, and but yeah, he wasn't. It's a weird thing about him. He would not have been aligned with the whole therapy thing. He might have come around to it eventually. I have the moment in my book where I'm kind of musing. I attended a psychedelic conference a few years ago, and I've kind of wondered what Terrence, if he was, what age he would have been then, about 77, kind of tottering around on a cane, kind of
right.
seeing where psychedelics had gone to. I think he would have been pretty pleased, but it would have taken some convincing. Um, another irony here is that I think is that the Republicans have now got on board with this
Yeah.
stuff, and
Yeah.
which is,
Yes.
it's funny that Trump,
Fascinating.
who is, if anyone is the inheritor of the sort of Nixonian kind of era of you know, not that it's only been a Republican. The war on drugs was driven only by Republicans. The Clintons did an immense amount of damage, arguably more than Nixon. But the irony of Trump, of a sort of conservative Republican, doing
Right.
what he did a couple of weeks ago and signaling that he's even open to more, and
Yes.
so a lot of that has to do with uh, like your friend, the Navy SEAL veterans,
Yep.
the insane suffering from the Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans in
Yep.
particular is
Yep.
incredibly, I mean, just terrifying to think about. And so, and that's where conservatives like Greg Abbott and Rick Perry, former governor of Texas, he's been a big proponent of psychedelics for several years and helped get a big bill passed in Texas several years ago. He wasn't in office anymore, but
Right.
he did ibogaine himself, I think, in a retreat outside of Tijuana.
Right.
He tells there's a famous story where he met Marcus Luttrell, the Lone Survivor, the hero of Lone Survivor with the Mark Wahlberg's movie. And that's been really important. That actually helps explain why MDMA was the very first psychedelic to cycle through the FDA's very complicated
Hmm.
approval process. It didn't get approved. And psilocybin is sort of next in the kind of down the pipeline. But with this executive order from Trump a couple weeks ago, I think
Yeah.
um, it's a whole new ballgame.
Yeah.
It's funny that MAP,
Fascinating.
these organizations like the Rick Doblin organization, actually
Yeah.
based here in Boston, and it's a multi-association for multidisciplinary association for psychedelic science, has been working on this for decades. I mean, it's been working on it forever, and one sort of flick of the pen in the Oval Office did arguably as much as they have done in several decades of and many tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars spent on research. So it's a good thing. There's um, nobody owns the rights to this. Republicans or Democrats are both sort of
Right.
equally guilty. So as long, and I think as most would agree, as long as it's getting done is a good thing. It's odd if to be doing something like that while you're also considering cutting Medicaid and Medicare, which could do
Right.
yeah, obviously we don't have to make this political, but is
Yeah.
somewhat contrary to the nature of making psychedelic drugs available to people. So,
Right.
but yeah, it's an interesting time. It's again like my 16-year-old self, I could have never in a million effing years fathomed that we would be where we are now.
Hmm. It's the title of your book's fantastic, A Short Strange Trip, and ultimately it feels like what this life is that we're all going through. It is a short, strange trip.
Mm.
And a few more questions before we wrap here is what are you most proud of in this book? Because it's quite a accomplishment in the subject that you even tackle.
The thing I'm most proud of, the thing that I had the most fun with is I went to La Chorrera,
Hmm.
and which is the small village in the Putumayo region in southern Colombia that Terence journeyed to with Dennis and some friends in 1971. They went there looking for an indigenous hallucinogen called ukuhe.
Hmm.
It contains DMT. They didn't know that, or no, I think they did know that, but they went looking for this hallucinogen. They were told falsely, I think, that it was taboo to even ask about it. So
Hmm.
they kind of gave up the search. But they did find magic mushrooms growing all over the place in this village. And the reason is because of the Jesuit missionaries there kept these large horned zebu cattle and psilocybin mushrooms is that I'm sure you know, do exceedingly well in the shit of hooved animals, especially cattle.
Right.
And they arrived in March and a huge bloom of psychedelics in the midst of a huge bloom of psychedelic mushrooms. And they took a lot of mushrooms over the course of the next several weeks and were, they were able to get some ayahuasca. They were smoking a lot of weed and um, why am I telling you this? Oh, because and so, but nobody had has ever written about Terrence, as far as I could tell, had ever gone there. And
Hmm.
so I went. But I thought like that's weird. Like this place was so important to him and so important to the evolution of his ideas. Um, and I went there and hung out for 10 days with some of the not the same people who hung out with him, but people who remembered him.
Hmm.
And that being there in that place, and like hung out with shamans and learned an insane amount about the drugs. It turns out ukuhe is not taboo at all. It just was growing with one of the shamans we hung out with. She was like kind of reached over, was like, no, here it is, right here. And
Wow.
um, so that was pretty astounding and just and it that in Terrence's day it was an extremely difficult place to reach. There was no airstrip as there is now. You
Hmm.
had to walk, you had to go to this the little village a little bit um north of it called El Encanto and then basically walk this sort of back-breaking 4-day hike
Wow.
down. It's called La Trocha, which is the old rubber trading trail connecting these two villages and now you can fly in, which there's 2 flights a month. And I was with a friend of mine who was a filmmaker who was making a film while we were there, and I was working on my book. And so and we yeah, it was just a magical time. It was tough to be there. It was still a very rough
Yeah.
kind of place. I mean, beautiful. If they had any infrastructure at all, they could turn it into a total tourist nightmare. Like just with like a TGI Fridays and but like but it's just an absolute paradise, as you can imagine.
Wow.
And that was really getting to know those people. We hung out with a clan of Watoto called Clan Garza. It's a White Heron clan and I became pretty close with the chief of Clan Garza, Ilio
Wow.
Butchehe, and his family and that was just a really terrific um experience, something that I'm happy we did, and it's kind of the centerpiece of the book.
That was really cool. Those are really cool.
Mm.
What's your next book? What are you working on ideas? I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm on like kind of chapter 2 right now. My next book is going to be about UFOs and people who search for extraterrestrial intelligence. I yeah, so so
You're
my first
timing them
book,
really well. That's because that's the
yeah.
next big hot
Yeah.
topic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. It was, I mean, that was a little, yeah, I guess a little mercenary on my part. But my first book was about Bigfoot. I went and hung out with Bigfooters, people who go to look for Bigfoot. I went on a bunch of what they call expeditions, and this new UFO book is not so dissimilar from that. I'm interested in kind of subcultures, American subcultures that are tend to be kind of overlooked or dismissed.
Yeah.
People think they sort of know what it means without really thinking about it too much. And I'm just, yeah, I guess I'm really interested in the marginal sort of iterations of the American experience and the psychedelic book is that too. Like, but maybe not quite on the same scale, but the UFOs will definitely be. I'm going just in the midst now of hanging out with people who, abductees and
Yeah.
experiencers
Yeah.
and all that stuff. And so, yeah, so that's the next one.
I love it. I my first job in TV, I was an audience coordinator for a live local talk show. It was in Seattle, Washington at the ABC
Oh,
affiliate. And we had all sorts it was every big guest, like it was part of the book tours and, music tours. Like Duran Duran, when they had their comeback tour, they came to the show and it was awesome. I
no.
got to introduce him. Anyway, it was fun. Peter Jennings' last World News Tonight was in Seattle. He was
Oh,
in Seattle to interview um, Bill Gates,
mhm.
and he said out of all the interviews he's ever done, that he was the most nervous with Bill Gates because they told him you have to wear a cardigan, you have to dress a certain way, and Bill likes it. It was really interesting.
Oh,
But his last World News Tonight was about the UFO phenomenon before he passed away. And I always thought that's such a
oh,
interesting, I don't know, data point in my mind because
oh,
here's one of the most respected journalists, broadcast journalists in the world,
yeah.
and he was really bringing it to the forefront, and that was back in 2004, 2005. I mean, it was a long
Oh,
time ago.
okay.
So
Yeah.
20, over 20 years later,
Yeah.
here we are. And man, when you write that, I want to keep talking to you. When you write that, because I'm all about this stuff, and
Yeah.
I'd love to talk to you about
Speaking of
that.
interesting times, it's a really interesting time in this field too.
Yeah,
Not so long ago that it was sort of academic professional suicide
right.
to talk about, and not so much anymore. You got very, very well-known, kind of esteemed um, scholars and scientists and astronomers kind of coming out and who are really interested, at least in having this discussion and looking to see what we could find.
Yeah,
So the book will be a mix of that and also hanging out with kind of ordinary folks who've have their own set of beliefs and their own experiences so
I have a former mentor of mine. His son's a fighter pilot, Navy fighter pilot off
yeah.
aircraft carriers, and he is engaged an orb light or whatever it was. I mean, it
Yeah.
was, something that they detected. It moved, faster than they could catch it. And this is a guy that's a Christian, like Orthodox Christian or like fundamental conservative Christian guy, Navy
Wow.
fighter pilot. And yeah, it's fascinating. So I
Wow.
can't wait for you to get that book out and
Interesting. Cool.
talk about that stuff as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's really, yeah, interesting times for sure.
John, thanks for coming on, and I just appreciate your ability to tell a story. The book is fantastic. Everyone, go buy A Short Strange Trip by John O'Connor. I'm going to put all your information in the show notes. And brother, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks so much, man. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Well, John, thanks again for coming on. Everyone, I'm going to put John's information in the show notes. Make sure you go check it out. And, this subject is not, plant medicine is not for everyone. And this is not an endorsement for everyone to go out and do such things. But it is definitely interesting that these things exist. People have definitely gone in and found many realities from these journeys, whether it be healing. Some people, like John's father, didn't find healing like they were looking for. But regardless, this was really a beautiful conversation, and I appreciate John, and this book's really interesting, so I highly recommend everyone reading it. And everyone, thanks again for listening. I'm Lucas Mack. This is the Lucas Mack Show, and I'll talk to you on the next episode. Thank you for listening. If you're struggling to break free and need support, go to my website at lucasmack.com. There you'll find resources like videos and ebooks, and also information on how to work with me for coaching. Thank you again, and I'll talk to you soon.